At my grandson's birthday lunch, my daughter-in-law toasted me. To the old lady who's going to a nursing home as soon as we get the inheritance. I raised my glass and revealed that the house deed was in the name of whoever took care of me until the end. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The sound of laughter filled my dining room that Sunday afternoon as we celebrated my grandson Tyler's 10th birthday. I'd spent all morning preparing his favorite meal, pot roast with glazed carrots and those mashed potatoes he loves, the ones with the little chunks still in them. My hands aren't what they used to be, but I'd managed to frost his cake just the way he liked it, with extra sprinkles on top. "Grandma, this is the best birthday ever!" Tyler exclaimed, his gap-toothed smile warming my heart as he hugged me tightly. I patted his head and smiled. At 65, these moments were what I lived for. After Harold passed 5 years ago, the house had grown so quiet. These family gatherings were precious to me, even if they had become increasingly rare. My son Thomas sat at the far end of the table, checking his phone more than he engaged in conversation. His wife Elizabeth was busy arranging the presents, in order of size, always the perfectionist, that one. They'd been married 15 years, but I still couldn't say I truly knew her. There was always something calculating behind those eyes. "Well, I think it's time for a toast," Elizabeth announced suddenly, standing up and raising her glass. The afternoon sun caught the diamond on her finger, the one she'd insisted Thomas upgrade for their 10th anniversary, despite their mounting credit card debt. I raised my glass of sparkling cider, smiling at Tyler. "To family," I began, but Elizabeth cut me off. "Actually, I'd like to make the toast today." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "To Patricia, Tyler's grandmother, to the old lady who'll be headed to a nursing home as soon as we get our inheritance." The room went silent. Tyler looked confused. Thomas choked on his drink, his face reddening. With embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. I felt like I'd been slapped. The glass in my hand trembled slightly, but I refused to drop it. 65 years of life teaches you how to take a blow without crumbling. "Elizabeth," Thomas finally managed, his voice strained. That's just a joke, Mom." But it wasn't a joke. We all knew it. The look on Elizabeth's face, a mixture of contempt and entitlement, made that perfectly clear. I set my glass down carefully, my arthritic fingers curling around the stem. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited for my reaction. "That's quite a toast," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I think you might be operating under a misunderstanding." I reached for my purse hanging on the back of my chair and pulled out a folded document. I'd brought it today to discuss with Thomas privately, but Elizabeth's toast had changed my plans. "The deed to this house," I said, smoothing the paper, on the table, "has a special provision. Harold and I set it up years ago. The house goes to whoever cares for me until the end, not based on blood, but on love and care." Elizabeth's smug smile vanished. Thomas stared at the document, then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "Mom, you don't need to—" "No, Thomas, I think we needed this clarity." I turned to Elizabeth. "There is no automatic inheritance. This house isn't a prize to be claimed by abandoning me to a nursing home." Elizabeth's face flushed deep red. "You can't be serious. After all we've done—" "And what exactly have you done, Elizabeth?" The words came out before I could stop them. "You've visited 4 times in the past year. You forgot my birthday. When I had pneumonia last winter, it was my neighbor Doris who checked on me daily, not my family." Tyler looked at his parents, confusion clouding his young face. "Mom? Dad? What's Grandma talking about?" No one answered him. Thomas stared at his plate, shoulders hunched. Elizabeth glared at me with naked hostility. I hadn't meant for things to explode this way. Not at Tyler's birthday. But as I looked around the table, at my son who couldn't meet my eyes, at the daughter-in-law who saw me as nothing but a walking inheritance, at my confused grandson caught in the middle, I realized something I'd been denying for too long. To them, I wasn't Patricia anymore. I wasn't a person with dreams, fears, and needs. I was just an old woman, a burden to be managed until I yielded whatever they thought I owed them. I folded the document and returned it to my purse, my hands no longer shaking. "Now," I said, forcing a smile for Tyler's sake, "who's ready for birthday cake?" The week after Tyler's birthday party passed in strained silence. I kept expecting a call from Thomas, some attempt to smooth things over, but my phone remained stubbornly quiet. It wasn't until Thursday evening that it finally rang. "Mom? It's me." Thomas's voice sounded unusually bright. "I was thinking I could come by tomorrow, help you with that leaky faucet you mentioned last month." The faucet I'd mentioned 3 months ago, before finally fixing it myself. I pressed my lips together, uncertain how to respond. "And Elizabeth found these wonderful vitamins for joint health," he continued, filling my silence. "She thought of you immediately. We could bring them over," I almost laughed. Elizabeth hadn't thought of me immediately for anything in years, unless it involved asking for money or babysitting. "That would be nice," I said instead, curious to see where this new attentiveness would lead. They arrived the next day bearing gifts, the promised vitamins, a casserole I knew Thomas hadn't cooked himself, and a bouquet of lilies that made me sneeze. Elizabeth hugged me, her embrace stiff and performative. "Your hydrangeas are looking lovely," she commented, wandering around my living room, her eyes lingering on the antique sideboard that had belonged to my mother. "Thomas, could you look at the garbage disposal? It's making a strange noise," I said, though it worked perfectly fine. As soon as Thomas disappeared into the kitchen, Elizabeth's demeanor changed. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Patricia, I hope there are no hard feelings about that silly toast. You know how I get with a little wine. Just a bad joke." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I was actually hoping we could talk about your arrangements." Her eyes flickered toward my study, where I kept my important papers. "At our age, it's so important to have everything in order." At our age. Elizabeth was 43. "Everything's in order," I assured her. "My lawyer, Clara, helped me update everything last spring." Something flashed in Elizabeth's eyes. Annoyance? Concern? Clara Gibson? But she's more of a friend than a professional, isn't she? "We know an excellent estate attorney who could—" "Clara's been practicing elder law for 30 years, I interrupted. "I'm quite satisfied with her work." Elizabeth's smile tightened. Before she could respond, Thomas called from the kitchen, asking where I kept my wrenches. "Excuse me," I said, leaving her standing there. Over the next few weeks, a strange new pattern emerged. Thomas called every few days. Elizabeth tagged along on every visit, always bearing gifts, always finding reasons to wander around my house, examining my possessions like items in a catalog. They invited me to dinner at their house, something that hadn't happened in over a year. They offered to take me to doctor appointments. Elizabeth even suggested I might enjoy having her organize my closets. One Tuesday afternoon, I returned from grocery shopping earlier than expected and found Elizabeth in my study, my file cabinet. Drawer partially open. "Oh!" she jumped, hastily closing the drawer. "I was just looking for a pen to leave you a note. You weren't answering your phone." The pen and paper sitting plainly on my desk told a different story. That night, I called, "Clara." "They're up to something," I said, after recounting the day's events. "Ever since I mentioned that provision in the deed, they've been different." Clara sighed. "Unfortunately, I've seen this before. Your revelation about the house made them realize they can't take your assets for granted. Now they're trying to position themselves as your caregivers. But it's so transparent, I protested. Elizabeth can barely hide her contempt for me. People can be surprisingly two-faced when inheritance is involved, Clara replied. But this might actually be useful. Useful? How? It shows you who they really are and what they really want. Her voice softened. Patricia, maybe it's time to see who truly cares about you, not what you can give them. After we hung up, I sat on my porch swing, watching the neighborhood settle into evening. The Johnsons across the street were walking their dog. 2 houses down, Mrs. Abernathy was watering her roses. And next door, Doris's lights glowed warmly in her kitchen window. Doris had brought me soup when I was sick. She collected my mail when I visited my sister in Florida. She remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders, yet I had barely acknowledged her kindnesses, focused instead on a son who visited out of obligation, and a daughter-in-law who couldn't even hide her impatience for me to die. Clara was right. It was time to find out who truly cared about Patricia, the person, not Patricia, the inheritance. I picked up my phone and began composing a text message to Thomas, Elizabeth, and even Tyler. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I added Doris's number to the list. The test would be simple but revealing. And maybe, just maybe, it would finally open my eyes to who deserved a place in my life and in my will. The following Saturday, I put my plan into action. I waited until late afternoon when I knew Thomas and Elizabeth would be home from Tyler's soccer practice. I pushed the coffee table in my living room aside, carefully lowered myself to the floor, and took a deep breath. Help. I called out, loud enough for someone passing by to hear. I've fallen. Then I dialed Thomas's number. When it went to voicemail, I left a trembling message. Thomas, I fell. I can't get up. Please come quickly. I called Elizabeth next, then Even. Tried Tyler's new phone, a gift from his parents to stay connected, though he rarely answered my calls. Each time I left the same urgent message. Finally, I called Doris. Patricia, is everything all right? Her voice was immediately concerned. I've fallen, Doris. I can't seem to get up. I made my voice sound weak, hating the deception but needing to know the truth. I'm coming right over. Don't try to move if it hurts. I heard her keys jangling through the phone before she hung up. Less than 2 minutes later, my doorbell rang repeatedly. Patricia, it's Doris. The door's locked. Key, under the blue pot, I called out weakly. Seconds later, Doris burst through the door, still wearing her gardening gloves, dirt smudged on her cheek. Her eyes widened when she saw me on the floor. Oh my goodness, what happened? She knelt beside me, her hands hovering uncertainly. Where does it hurt? Should I call an ambulance? The genuine concern in her eyes made my throat tighten. No calculation there, no assessment of what caring for me might yield her someday. Doris, I need to tell you something, I said, sitting up. I'm not actually hurt. Her eyebrows shot up in confusion. I was testing something. I explained my experiment, watching her expression shift from concern to understanding. You called your family first, didn't you? She asked quietly. I nodded, embarrassed now by my scheme. I'm sorry for lying to you. Doris sat back on her heels, removing her gardening gloves. Don't be. I understand why you did it. It's just, ever since Tyler's birthday party, they've been acting different. Suddenly they care about my health, my house, my papers. I shook my head. But not about me. I've been watching, Doris admitted. Their cars in your driveway, all those gift bags. Elizabeth even asked me if I knew anything about your will. She what? I was stunned. Last week when I was getting my mail, said she was concerned about unscrupulous people taking advantage of you. Doris's mouth tightened. I told her you were sharper than both of us put together. I laughed for what felt like the first time in weeks. Doris helped me up from the floor and I invited her to stay for tea. We sat at my kitchen table, the late afternoon sun warming the room as we talked. Really talked, like two people genuinely interested in each other's lives. I learned that Doris had been a librarian before retiring, that she'd lost her partner Jean 3 years ago, that she made intricate quilts donated to children's hospitals. She showed me pictures on her phone of her latest creation, a colorful hodgepodge of fabrics that somehow came together beautifully. Like life, she said, smiling at the photo, bits and pieces that don't seem to match, but somehow they make something worth looking at. As she spoke, my phone remained silent. No missed calls, no worried texts, no son rushing to his mother's aid. You know, Doris said gently, family isn't always who we're born to or who we give birth to. Sometimes family is who shows up when you call. Her words struck me like a physical blow. For years I'd made excuses for Thomas's absences, for Elizabeth's thinly veiled contempt. I'd told myself that blood was thicker than water, that family was family. But sitting across from Doris, this woman who'd dropped everything to help me, who asked for nothing in return, I wondered if I'd been wrong all along. My phone finally chimed at 7:43 p.m., over 3 hours after my calls. Mom, just saw your message. Everything okay? No urgency, no concern. Just a perfunctory check-in that had taken him hours to make. I looked at Doris, who was telling me about a book club she thought I might enjoy, her eyes bright with genuine warmth. Then I looked back at my phone, at the son who couldn't be bothered, to return an emergency call from his mother. You're right, I said to Doris, setting my phone aside without responding to Thomas. Family is who shows up, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of obligation lifting from my shoulders. I didn't owe loyalty to people who saw me as nothing but a future inheritance. I didn't have to keep trying to earn love from those unwilling to give it freely. As Doris and I clinked our teacups in a silent toast, I made a decision. It was time to rebuild my definition of family, and time to rewrite my will. Monday morning arrived with a pounding at my front door. I was in the kitchen, enjoying my second cup of coffee and the crossword puzzle when the knocking began. Insistent, impatient. Mom, open up! Thomas's voice carried through the house. I took my time walking to the door, steeling myself for what was coming. When I opened it, Thomas pushed past me, Elizabeth close behind him. Why didn't you answer my text? Thomas demanded. I was worried sick. A lie. If he'd been worried, he would have come yesterday, not nearly 24 hours later. I was busy, I said simply, closing the door behind them. Elizabeth's eyes darted around my living room, noting the teacups still on the coffee table from Doris's return visit last evening. You had company? Her voice was sharp with suspicion. Doris came over. I moved back to my kitchen table, letting them follow. She checks on me regularly. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Look, Mom, about your message. I fell, I interrupted. Couldn't get up. Called for help. We were at Tyler's game, Elizabeth said quickly. You know how important those are to him. Doris was gardening, I replied. She was here within 2 minutes. Thomas had the grace to look embarrassed. Mom, that's not fair. We live 15 minutes away. You responded 3 hours later, Thomas. Not even a phone call, just a text. Elizabeth's face tightened. We've been under a lot of stress lately. If you'd bothered to ask about our lives instead of just expecting us to drop everything. What kind of stress? I asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She glanced at Thomas, who suddenly became very interested in the pattern on my tablecloth. Financial pressures, Elizabeth finally said. The economy, you know. Our investments haven't performed as expected. Thomas cleared his throat. We might have to sell the lake house they'd purchased 2 years ago, against my advice. The lake house that had stretched their finances to the breaking. point, but that Elizabeth had insisted they needed to keep up appearances. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, genuinely meaning it for Thomas's sake, if not for hers. "Well," Elizabeth said, her voice shifting to a sweeter tone, "we were actually hoping to discuss something with you," and there it was. The real reason for their visit? "We've been thinking about your situation," she continued, placing her manicured hand on mine. "Living alone at your age can be so dangerous. That fall you had proves it." "I've lived alone for 5 years," I pointed out. "This was my first fall." Thomas jumped in. "What if we converted your basement into an apartment for you? You could sell this place, move in with us. We'd be right upstairs if you needed anything." I almost laughed at the transparency of it. Sell my house, my most valuable asset, and move into their basement. How convenient for them. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully. "But I'm happy here." Elizabeth's smile stiffened. "Patricia, be reasonable. This house is too big for one person. The maintenance alone, I manage just fine." "Mom," Thomas sighed, "we're trying to help. After Dad died, you've been, well, isolated. We worry." Did they really think I didn't see through this sudden concern? This house was worth over $400,000 in today's market. The timing of their worry was hardly coincidental. "Actually," I said, "I've been giving this some thought. I'm considering taking in a boarder." "A what?" Elizabeth's horror was almost comical. "A boarder. Someone to rent the spare bedroom. Company for me. Extra income. Someone in the house if I need help." I sipped my coffee. "Doris knows a nursing student looking for affordable housing." "Absolutely not!" Elizabeth exploded. "Some stranger living in your house? Using your things? Having access to everything?" Thomas put a restraining hand on her arm. "What Elizabeth means is, there are safety concerns. You don't know this person. I'd meet them first, of course." I set down my cup. "Besides, I thought you'd be pleased. It addresses your concerns about me being alone." Elizabeth stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Thomas, tell her." But Thomas was looking at me oddly, as if seeing something new in my face. "Mom, is everything okay? You seem different." "I am different," I admitted. "I've realized some things recently." "What things?" His voice held genuine curiosity. Before I could answer, Elizabeth's phone chimed. She glanced at it, then nudged Thomas. "We need to go. That investment meeting, remember?" Thomas hesitated, looking between us. "Just think about our offer," Elizabeth pressed, already moving toward the door. "Selling this place makes so much sense. We could help each other." After they left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, thinking about what had just happened. They needed money. They wanted my house. All their recent attention, the sudden concern for my well-being. It wasn't about me at all. I pulled out the folder of financial documents I'd gathered over the weekend. Bank statements, property records, investment accounts. Everything Harold and I had built over 45 years of marriage. Not a fortune by any means, but substantial enough to solve Thomas and Elizabeth's financial problems. The question was, did they deserve it? I remembered how Thomas had looked at me today, that moment of genuine concern when he'd asked if I was okay. Whatever Elizabeth's motivations, I still saw flashes of the son I'd raised. Somewhere beneath the influence of his wife, that boy still existed. And then there was Tyler. Innocent in all this adult manipulation, yet potentially affected by whatever decisions I made. I closed the folder and reached for my phone. It was time to call Clara again. I needed to restructure more than just my will. I needed to rebuild my entire concept of family. "You're sure about this?" Clara asked, looking up from the documents spread across her desk. "It's a significant change." I nodded, feeling more certain than I had in years. "I'm sure." It had been 3 weeks since my fall, 3 weeks of careful reflection and planning. 3 weeks of Thomas and Elizabeth making increasingly desperate attempts to convince me to sell my house and move in with them. Well then, Clara gathered the papers into a neat stack. I'll have these ready for your signature by Friday. And Patricia, she added, her voice softening, I'm proud of you. I felt a flush of warmth at her words. How long had it been since anyone had expressed pride in me? Not as a mother or grandmother or widow, but as a person making difficult but necessary choices? When I left Clara's office, I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I headed to the community center where Doris had invited me countless times to join the Silver Threads group. I'd always declined, telling myself I was too busy or too tired. In reality, I'd been waiting for Thomas and Tyler to fill my days, visits that rarely materialized. The meeting room was bright and busy, a dozen women around my age engaged in animated conversation. Doris spotted me immediately, her face lighting up with surprise and delight. Patricia, you came! She hurried over, taking my hands in hers. Everyone, this is my neighbor Patricia. The welcome I received was warm and genuine. These women didn't care about my house or what I could give them. They simply enjoyed each other's company. Dorothy, a retired teacher with a quick wit, was organizing a book club. Mabel, whose arthritis-gnarled hands didn't stop her from creating beautiful watercolors, was planning an art show at the local library. Helen and June, sisters in their 70s, were coordinating volunteer shifts at the children's hospital. We could use another reader for story hour, Helen mentioned. The children love new voices. I found myself volunteering before I even realized it. I'd love to. I used to read to my kindergarten classes years ago. You were a teacher? June asked, interested in a way Elizabeth never had been when I mentioned my former career. For the next hour, I talked and laughed more than I had in months. These women had lives full of purpose and connection. They weren't waiting around for children or grandchildren to remember they existed. They had built something meaningful together. That evening, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset, and thinking about the day. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Mom, Elizabeth found a great assisted living place. Beautiful grounds, activities, the works. We should tour it this weekend. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching something I'd been considering since my talks with Clara: home sharing programs for seniors. The concept was simple. Homeowners with extra space could rent rooms to carefully screened individuals, often students or young professionals. The homeowner got extra income and companionship. The renter got affordable housing and potentially formed an intergenerational bond. The next morning, I contacted a local program recommended by Clara. The process would take time, background, checks, interviews, compatibility assessments, but it felt right. My house had 5 bedrooms. Why should 4 of them sit empty when they could provide both income for me and housing for someone who needed it? When Thomas and Elizabeth showed up unannounced that evening, I was reviewing the application materials. Mom, you didn't answer my text, Thomas said, frowning at the papers spread across my dining room table. What's all this? Home sharing program, I replied, not looking up. I'm turning the spare bedrooms into rentals. Elizabeth's face went pale. Rentals? You can't. Be serious. I'm very serious. I finally met their eyes. This house is too big for just me, as you've pointed out, but I don't need to sell it to solve that problem. But what about our plan? Elizabeth sputtered. The assisted living tour? I'm not moving to assisted living, I said firmly. I'm staying right here, and I'm bringing life back into this house. Thomas looked bewildered. Mom, when did you start thinking about all this? When I realized I'd been living my life waiting for visits that rarely came, I answered honestly. When I understood that I needed to build my own happiness instead of expecting others to provide it for me. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. We've been busy, but that doesn't mean It means exactly what it means, I interrupted gently. You have your life, and that's as it should be, but I need to have mine too. Elizabeth wasn't giving up so easily. These programs are dangerous. You'll have strangers in your house. What if they steal from you? What if the program does? Thorough background checks, I explained patiently. And frankly, I'm more concerned about the people trying to convince me to sell my most valuable asset than I am about carefully vetted renters. Her mouth snapped shut, color rising in her cheeks. Thomas, I continued, turning to my son, I know things are difficult financially right now. I'm happy to discuss how I might help. With an actual loan, properly documented, not by selling my home and security. He stared at me, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. This wasn't the compliant, eager-to-please mother he was accustomed to. This was a woman taking charge of her own life. Mom, he finally said, his voice quiet. You've changed. I smiled, feeling the truth of his words in my bones. Yes, I have. 1 year later, I celebrated my 66th birthday in a house full of life and laughter. The dining room table that had witnessed that cruel toast at Tyler's birthday was now surrounded by my chosen family. Doris sat at my right, her gift, a handmade quilt with patterns representing our year of friendship, already draped across my shoulders despite the June warmth. To my left was Amara, the nursing student who had become my first tenant, and now something closer to a granddaughter. She had decorated the entire house with streamers and balloons, insisting that 66 deserved proper celebration. Miguel and his husband David, who rented the 2 bedrooms in the converted basement, had prepared a feast that put my pot roast to shame. Dishes from Miguel's Mexican heritage mixed with David's Italian family recipes. Both music teachers at the local college, they filled the house with impromptu concerts that made me fall in love with classical music all over again. Even Mrs. Abernathy from down the street had come, bringing her famous lemon squares and stories about the neighborhood from decades before I'd arrived. The doorbell rang just as Miguel was about to serve the cake. Amara jumped up. I'll get it. I wasn't expecting anyone else, but in this new chapter of my life, unexpected visitors were usually welcome ones. Fellow Silver Threads members or new friends from the hospital where I now volunteered reading to children. Instead, Thomas stood in the doorway, alone, a wrapped package tucked under his arm. Happy birthday, Mom, he said, his voice hesitant. I hope I'm not intruding. In the year since I'd transformed my house and my life, I'd seen Thomas exactly 4 times. Each visit had been strained, with Elizabeth notably absent. According to the neighborhood grapevine, they had sold their lake house and were living more modestly now. I heard whispers of marriage counseling, of financial advisors, of Elizabeth's displeasure at their reduced circumstances. You're not intruding, I assured him, stepping aside to let him in. We're just about to have cake. There's plenty for everyone. He paused in the foyer, taking in the house he'd grown up in, now vibrant with new paint colors, rearranged furniture, and photographs of people he didn't know alongside the familiar family portraits. You've done a lot with the place, he commented, following me to the dining room. Life is too short for beige walls, I replied, quoting Doris's design philosophy. When we entered the dining room, the conversation dimmed slightly. My housemates and friends had heard about Thomas, about Elizabeth's cruel toast, about their transparent attempts to get me to sell my home. Everyone, I said, this is my son, Thomas. To their credit, they welcomed him warmly, pulling up another chair, setting an extra place at the table. Thomas seemed overwhelmed by the easy camaraderie, the genuine affection that flowed around the table. I didn't realize you'd have so many people here, he said quietly as Miguel served him a slice of cake. This is my family now, I replied simply. After cake and coffee, Thomas asked if we could speak privately. We stepped out onto the back porch, the evening air sweet with the scent of the jasmine Amara had planted along the fence. "Mom, I owe you an apology," he began. A big one. I waited, letting him find the words. "I let Elizabeth dictate how we treated you. I convinced myself it was normal, that all couples prioritize their nuclear family over extended family." He shook his head. "But seeing you today, with these people who clearly adore you after knowing you for just a year, it made me realize how much I've missed, how much I've let slip away." "Where is Elizabeth tonight?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. We're separating. Have been for 3 months now. I didn't want to burden you with it." I felt a complicated mix of emotions: sadness for my son's pain, relief that Elizabeth's influence might be waning, guilt that I hadn't known about such a significant change in his life. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "It's been coming for a long time," he admitted. "The financial stress was part of it. But honestly, Mom, I think what you did, standing up for yourself, refusing to be manipulated, it made me see things more clearly in my own marriage." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting through the screen door. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Thomas continued. "But I hope maybe we can start again somehow. I miss you, and Tyler misses you terribly." "I miss him too," I said, feeling the truth of it deep in my heart. Despite everything, Tyler had always been an innocent in the adult machinations. "Would you consider letting him visit sometimes? Maybe stay over occasionally?" Thomas asked. "I know you have a full house now, but—" "Of course he can visit," I interrupted. "He's always welcome here. And so are you, Thomas, but on different terms than before." He nodded, understanding. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or retired to their rooms, I sat on the porch swing with Doris, sharing one last cup of tea. "So, Thomas wants to reconnect," she said. "It appears so. And how do you feel about that?" I considered the question carefully. "Cautious, hopeful. I won't let him hurt me again, but I won't shut the door on reconciliation either." Doris nodded approvingly. "You know, when Jean died, I thought my family was gone forever. Then I met you, and the others, and realized family is something we create and nurture, not just something we're born into." "Thank you for teaching me that," I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "For showing me I could rebuild at 65. "Rebuild?" Doris chuckled. "Patricia, you didn't just rebuild. You created something beautiful from scratch, something that's entirely yours." As the crickets chirped and the evening stars emerged, I thought about the cruel toast that had set everything in motion. Elizabeth had meant to hurt me, to remind me of my supposed irrelevance. Instead, she had inadvertently given me the push I needed to reclaim my life, my house, and my power. The home I had once feared losing had transformed into something far more valuable. A true haven filled with chosen family, with purpose, with joy. A living legacy that would continue to grow and flourish, regardless of who ultimately inherited the physical structure. And that, I realized, was a victory greater than any I could have imagined.